I've been sabotaged. Brutal statements from Lewis Hamilton after the Belgian Grand Prix have sparked furious anger within Ferrari. Stay until the end to find out about the massive internal fine Ferrari wants to impose on Hamilton. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Lewis Hamilton's fury following the Belgian Grand Prix has reached levels unseen in recent memory, not just within his own storied career, but in the modern era of Formula One itself. The seven-time world champion, a master of composure and carefully calculated diplomacy, has finally erupted after what he now describes as not merely poor team management or strategic errors, but a deliberate and unforgivable act of internal sabotage. His words, spoken behind closed doors with the intensity of a man who feels betrayed on a fundamental level, have begun to leak beyond the walls of the Ferrari motorhome, spreading like wildfire across the paddock. The result: chaos, confusion, and the very real sense that one of the most high-profile alliances in the history of the sport is about to come crashing down in a spectacular implosion. What happened at Spa-Francorchamps has gone far beyond a disappointing result. In Hamilton's view, it was the moment the illusion of equality shattered, and he's no longer willing to stay silent. The tension had been building for months. Hamilton had long suspected that his treatment within the Scuderia was secondary to that of Charles Leclerc, Ferrari's golden boy and the centerpiece of the team's future. But in Belgium, everything exploded. Despite both drivers being promised the exact same technical upgrades, a newly optimized brake cooling system aimed at minimizing temperature spikes, a reworked rear wing designed to provide better stability through high-speed corners like Outrage and Blanchiment, and a redesigned clutch mapping system to enhance launch control and reduce wheel spin during critical low-speed exits, only one driver reaped the benefits. It was not Hamilton. The very components that had been promised to both sides of the garage mysteriously manifested in full functionality on Leclerc's SF25, while Hamilton's car remained plagued by inconsistencies, overheating brakes, unstable rear-end behavior, and clutch oscillations that made acceleration out of la source and the bus stop chicane nearly impossible to manage with any precision. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Throughout the weekend, Hamilton's frustrations grew more evident. On Friday, he cut a dejected figure after FP1, radioing in repeated complaints about rear instability and brake fade, issues that the upgrades were specifically designed to solve. While Leclerc topped sector times and praised the car's balance, Hamilton found himself fighting a machine that felt unpredictable, inconsistent, and, as he would later confide to his inner circle, absolutely unfinished. In FP2 and FP3, the discrepancies became even more apparent. Leclerc's telemetry revealed stronger launch performance and tighter braking efficiency, especially in Turn 5 and Turn 18, while Hamilton's SF25 struggled to find grip, suffered unexplained tire degradation, and registered repeated clutch slippage under load. By the time qualifying rolled around on Saturday, Hamilton was already visibly furious. He exited Q1 by just 0.04 of a second, a shocking result for a driver of his caliber, but one that made brutal sense when his data was finally analyzed. His energy recovery systems were operating at 91% optimal efficiency, compared to Leclerc's full 100%. His top speed through the Kemmel Straight was a full 7 km/h slower than Leclerc's, despite identical wing configurations being declared to the FIA. In the paddock, whispers began to swirl. Engineers from rival teams noted that Hamilton's throttle trace didn't match the mechanical grip he should have had based on the announced upgrades. Something was wrong, very wrong, and yet Ferrari's official explanation boiled down to setup differences and driver preference. Hamilton didn't buy it. By Sunday morning, team principal Frédéric Vasseur had held two separate briefings, one for Leclerc, one for Hamilton. Insiders say the meetings were entirely different in tone. While Leclerc was encouraged to push for a podium and given the green light for aggressive tire strategy, Hamilton was told to focus on tire management and consistency. The difference was insulting, and Hamilton knew it. He'd been around this game long enough to recognize when a team was managing expectations in advance of a result they already knew was going to disappoint. Still, he kept quiet, for a moment longer. Then came the race. Within the first few laps, Hamilton knew the weekend was doomed. His starts were poor, with sluggish gear changes and evident hesitation off the line, clutch problems that were supposedly solved with the new mapping. Through less combs and rivage, he struggled to keep the car planted. His radio messages became increasingly frustrated. Why am I losing power on exit? Why am I overheating in clean air? Why is the rear snapping under braking? The responses from the pit wall were vague and mechanical. "We're analyzing, Lewis. Stand by. No concerns from our side." But there were concerns, big ones, and Hamilton was no longer willing to let them go unspoken. By lap 28, Hamilton had dropped to P14, stuck in a DRS train behind a Williams and an Alpha Tauri, unable to overtake, unable to trust his machinery, unable to believe what was happening. Leclerc, meanwhile, sailed comfortably in P3, maintaining tire life, managing engine temps with ease, and executing a flawless two-stop strategy that Hamilton was never offered. When the checkered flag finally fell, Hamilton crossed the line in P16. 16th. For a man of his achievements, a position like that, under these circumstances, felt like humiliation. And Hamilton does not take humiliation lightly. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Post-race, there was no disguising the mood. He skipped the usual cool-down room. He avoided the media pen. He walked directly into the motorhome and locked the door behind him. What followed was an hour-long closed-door meeting involving Hamilton, his management team, his race engineer, and briefly, two senior technical staff who reportedly left the meeting looking visibly shaken. Hamilton didn't yell. He didn't scream. But what he said, according to a source with knowledge of the exchange, was unequivocal. This isn't incompetence. This is betrayal. Since Spa, the fallout has only grown. Hamilton's PR team has begun a subtle but unmistakable shift in messaging. Mentions of Ferrari have been minimized. Behind the scenes, his representatives are believed to be initiating exploratory talks with Red Bull's top brass. Conversations that, only a month ago, seemed completely out of the realm of possibility. Helmut Marko, once dismissive of Hamilton's prospects at Red Bull, is now reportedly intrigued by the commercial and performance upside. Christian Horner has remained strategically silent. The Paddock is buzzing. And Ferrari? They've gone into damage control mode, leaking friendly statements to the Italian press and doubling down on their claims that both cars received the same upgrade package. But that claim now feels like a punchline. Too many eyes have seen too much data. Too many engineers have whispered behind the backs of too many journalists. Hamilton's silence is over. The gloves are off. And what happens next may not just reshape the driver market, it may bring about the total collapse of one of the most hyped partnerships in the sport's history. Hamilton isn't just angry. He's awakened. He's analyzing everything, from internal politics to component delivery timelines. He's begun tracking who speaks to whom in the garage. He's reportedly ordered an independent audit of component distribution over the past 6 race weekends. And more than anything, he's preparing for war, not on the racetrack, but in the boardrooms, in the court of public opinion, and in the heart of a sport that may soon bear witness to one of the most shocking transfers ever imagined. What was supposed to be Hamilton's legacy-defining final chapter is now becoming a revolution. And the sport, the fans, and the teams are watching with bated breath, knowing full well that when a legend like Lewis Hamilton feels betrayed, the storm that follows leaves no one untouched. In a weekend that was already carrying enormous pressure for Ferrari, everything imploded behind closed doors in a way that may have permanently fractured the relationship between Lewis Hamilton and the Italian team. What happened in the hours leading up to qualifying was not just a simple case of differing setups or strategic experimentation. It was a moment of betrayal, at least from Hamilton's perspective, that may prove to be the final straw in a partnership that was built on promises, optimism, and mutual respect, but now lies in disarray, surrounded by doubt, frustration, and a rapidly widening trust deficit. Just hours before the cars were scheduled to roll out for the crucial qualifying session, Hamilton was informed, without prior warning or any meaningful discussion, that his car would not be fitted with a complete upgrade package that had been heavily anticipated for weeks. The package, designed to improve aerodynamic efficiency at the rear end, was expected to deliver critical performance gains on a high-speed circuit where straight-line stability and cornering precision are everything. The upgrades had shown promising data in both CFD simulations and limited wind tunnel testing, and had been part of Ferrari's long-term development roadmap intended to close the gap to Red Bull and McLaren. Yet somehow, inexplicably, only one of the 2 SF25s would receive the full treatment. And it wasn't Hamilton's. The official explanation, delivered to Hamilton in a hastily arranged pre-session engineering meeting, was cloaked in vague references to safety concerns and setup compatibility issues. Engineers reportedly told Hamilton that based on the limited test data, They had identified potential issues with the way the new rear wing and diffuser worked when combined with Hamilton's preferred ride height and mechanical balance. They claimed that, in the absence of sufficient simulation time to verify these variables, they had no choice but to implement the upgrade solely on Leclerc's chassis in order to gather clean, uninterrupted data. In short, it wasn't personal, it was strategic. A calculated decision for the benefit of the team's long-term performance analysis. But to Hamilton, it was deeply personal. According to multiple sources close to his inner circle, his immediate reaction was one of disbelief followed quickly by rage. Not only had he not been consulted, but he felt blindsided, excluded from a technical decision that would directly compromise his competitiveness on one of the most iconic and demanding circuits on the calendar. Witnesses claim he stormed out of the engineering briefing without saying a word, refused to speak to several key engineers in the garage for the remainder of the afternoon, and spent the final hour before qualifying isolated in his driver room with no communication to any team personnel apart from his race engineer. His demeanor during qualifying itself, muted, focused, but visibly disconnected, reflected a man going through the motions, aware that his weekend had been effectively sabotaged before it even began. The fallout from that decision played out with ruthless clarity on race day. From the moment the lights went out, the performance delta between the two Ferraris was obvious to anyone watching. Leclerc's car looked planted, responsive, and dramatically more stable through the critical high-speed sections of the track. His ability to attack Eau Rouge and maintain momentum through Rydillon gave him a visible advantage heading into the Kemmel Straight, where top-end speed had been a weakness for Ferrari in previous rounds. Under braking, Leclerc's SF25 was not only more predictable, but also showed improved modulation and balance, a likely benefit of the revised airflow over the rear suspension and diffuser area. Leclerc, to his credit, made the most of the situation. He stayed within striking distance of the frontrunners for most of the race and capitalized brilliantly when a late safety car allowed him to pit onto fresh softs and overtake two rivals in quick succession, securing a hard-fought third place that was met with jubilation from the Ferrari pit wall. But in the other garage, the contrast was agonizing. Hamilton's race began with warning signs during the formation lap itself. He reported excessive vibration in the brake pedal and flagged a concerning lag in throttle response as he tried to warm the tires. Just 7 laps in, his radio messages painted a picture of a car that was not only uncompetitive but fundamentally flawed. He complained of aggressive locking into low-speed corners, inconsistent deceleration, and a strange lateral pull that made the car feel unstable under braking load. By lap 10, his tone had shifted from confusion to disbelief. The brakes, he claimed, were overheating to the point of near failure. He began lifting earlier into corners to compensate, but doing so made him vulnerable on corner exit, where his acceleration was further compromised by what he later described as a delayed power surge, likely caused by intermittent clutch slippage. Hamilton, who has driven through countless technical challenges in his career, now found himself unable to stay in DRS range of even the midfield cars. The car simply wouldn't respond to his inputs. After limping across the finish line in a lowly position, far removed from where he expected, or deserved, to be, Hamilton gave a post-race interview that immediately went viral. It was raw, unfiltered, and scathing in a way that few of his previous interviews had ever been. From the first corner, something felt off, he said, visibly exhausted. The clutch wasn't engaging properly. Every time I tried to accelerate out of a slow corner, there was a delay, like the power was being lost somewhere before it got to the wheels. And the brakes, they were gone before lap 10. I kept telling them, lap after lap, that something wasn't right. They kept telling me it was within expected parameters. But you can't gaslight a driver who's been doing this for 17 years. I know when something's wrong. And today, everything was wrong. His comments didn't stop there. When pressed on whether the upgrade disparity contributed to the performance gap between him and Leclerc, Hamilton didn't deflect. He didn't sugarcoat. "You tell me," he said, staring down the camera. "Look at the data. Watch the onboard. One car was flying. One car was struggling to stay on the track. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm just here to say what happened. If people want to pretend it's all part of the plan, that's their choice. I know what I felt in that car. And I know what I wasn't given this weekend." The implications of that statement reverberated instantly. Was this a public condemnation of Ferrari's internal politics? A signal that the trust between driver and team had completely broken down? Or perhaps the first step toward an inevitable separation that now feels less like a question of if and more like when? Team principal Frédéric Vasseur tried to downplay the controversy in his post-race briefing, insisting that the upgrade deployment was purely tactical and would be applied to Hamilton's car at the next round. But the damage was already done. The optics of a 7-time world champion being denied equal machinery while his teammates secured a podium underlined exactly why so many believe Hamilton's Ferrari dream has turned into something else entirely, a waking nightmare from which he's now searching for a way out. And the Paddock, as ever, is watching with bated breath. The sense of betrayal simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over as Lewis Hamilton emerged from the Belgian Grand Prix weekend not just disappointed, but enraged. For the 7-time world champion, it wasn't merely a race gone wrong, a technical misfire, or a strategic misstep. It was something far more personal. The frustration in his voice during post-race interviews wasn't about lap times or telemetry. It was about principle, about integrity, about the fundamental promise that when he joined Ferrari, he would be treated with the respect and parity his legacy demanded. And that promise, in his eyes, had been shattered. Hamilton, a man who has spent the better part of 2 decades at the highest levels of motorsport, made no effort to hide his fury. "We were promised equal treatment," he said, voice steady but eyes sharp. "We were told both cars would have the same upgrades, the same resources, the same tools to compete. That's the standard we agreed on from day one. Today? That was clearly not the case. You all saw it. I finished P16. P16. In a car that felt like it didn't belong anywhere near the front, or even the midfield. Meanwhile, Charles gets the upgraded aero package, the revised clutch system, and he's standing on the podium. That doesn't feel like coincidence. That feels like a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice." Those words, uttered with quiet venom, echoed through the paddock like a shot fired in the dark. And they weren't just the bitter complaints of a frustrated driver. They were the cry of a man who feels systematically betrayed by the very institution that convinced him to make the boldest move of his career. Behind the scenes, the story runs even deeper, and it's laced with tension, power plays, and mistrust. According to team insiders and engineers familiar with the week's preparation, Hamilton had been one of the loudest and most committed voices pushing for the new performance upgrades to be introduced at Spa. These weren't optional gimmicks, they were significant revisions, a more aggressive rear wing design, a lighter suspension component, and most importantly, a completely reworked clutch mapping aimed at improving launch performance and mid-corner stability in low-grip conditions. Hamilton, ever the perfectionist, spent 3 consecutive nights earlier in the week working through simulator sessions that extended past midnight. He reportedly requested additional run data, cross-referenced thermal degradation simulations, and worked with a simulator team to isolate minor inefficiencies in throttle pickup behavior under wet-dry transition scenarios, precisely the conditions expected for the Spa weekend. His feedback, which multiple engineers later confirmed had been instrumental, was directly fed into the final version of the upgrade package. It was Hamilton's driving, his analysis, his relentless demands for optimization that helped shape the very components that eventually ended up on the SF24. But when it came time to bring the new parts to the circuit, Ferrari made a last-minute decision to install the upgrades exclusively on Charles Leclerc's car. The official explanation was one of caution, data validation, reliability concerns, and the limited time available between FP1 and qualifying. But those justifications didn't sit well, not with Hamilton, not with fans, and certainly not with many within the team who had witnessed the internal discussions. What stung most for Hamilton was that he hadn't just contributed to the development, he had championed it. He had done the dirty work in the virtual cockpit, pored over the spreadsheets, challenged the design team on efficiency ratios and load distributions. And then, without warning or consultation, he was told the package would only be available on the other side of the garage. To many, especially those within his inner circle, it wasn't just a racing decision, it was an insult. Because if the team had truly feared reliability risks, why would they gamble the entire race weekend of their number 1 driver, the face of their global marketing campaigns, the most decorated name in the paddock? And if they had so little trust in the upgrades that Hamilton himself helped refine, why did they greenlight Leclerc to run the new package without any hesitation? The optics were damning. The performance difference on track only made things worse. Leclerc's car was visibly more stable through Outrage, more responsive under braking at Les Combes, and had superior traction out of La Source. Meanwhile, Hamilton wrestled with understeer, reported unpredictable power delivery in Sector 2, and was heard on team radio questioning why the setup felt completely foreign from what they had practiced. Inside the Ferrari garage, the atmosphere quickly became radioactive. Engineers on Hamilton's side reportedly grew restless and confused, many of them caught off guard by the last-minute withdrawal of the upgraded components. One source described a scene of chaos on Friday morning as mechanics scrambled to adjust setup parameters on Hamilton's car to compensate for the lack of updated parts, using outdated balance sheets and older aero maps that didn't reflect the simulations they had trained on. The team briefing that evening, usually a structured and technical affair, turned into a fragmented and awkward session in which Hamilton remained stone-faced, offered minimal input, and exited without saying a word. By Saturday morning, the tension was visible to anyone paying attention. The body language between the two driver camps was cold. Hamilton and Leclerc, who have maintained a publicly respectful relationship throughout the season, barely acknowledged each other in the garage. Communication between the two engineering teams was reduced to logistical formalities. The usually synchronized Ferrari Paddock operation looked disjointed, fractured. And by the end of Sunday, the result on paper only served to confirm the psychological outcome. Leclerc on the podium, Hamilton tumbling down the order, his championship hopes bleeding out in front of a global audience. Fans, pundits, and former drivers quickly jumped into the fray. Social media platforms exploded with anger and disbelief, many questioning whether Ferrari had just shown its true colors. Supporters of Hamilton pointed to a pattern, subtle at first, but now increasingly undeniable, of strategic decisions, pit call preferences, and development priorities that consistently seemed to lean toward Leclerc. The conspiracy theory that had quietly circulated all season suddenly felt plausible. And for Hamilton, who has always prided himself on loyalty, discipline, and fairness, the realization that those values may not be reciprocated has triggered what insiders are calling a complete reassessment of his position inside the team. Back in Maranello, the fallout is still being measured. Team executives are said to be scrambling to control the narrative, issuing internal memos and preparing press talking points in an attempt to downplay the incident. But damage control may not be enough. The incident in Belgium has sparked a fire that can't be smothered with generic PR language. Hamilton, once considered the cornerstone of Ferrari's ambitious comeback plan, now looks increasingly alienated. There are even whispers that his management team has reactivated back-channel communications with other outfits. Some say Mercedes, others claim Aston Martin, and a few even point again to Red Bull, suggesting that the drama unfolding behind Ferrari's closed doors may be pushing Hamilton toward a sensational final career twist. And through it all, Hamilton remains composed, but distant. His public demeanor is polished, but the steel in his tone tells a different story. He's a man who has given everything to this sport, sacrificed comfort, weathered controversy, endured the heartbreak of Abu Dhabi, and still returned with the heart of a warrior. But every warrior has a limit. And at Spa, surrounded by the forests and history of one of the world's greatest circuits, Lewis Hamilton may have reached his. The atmosphere inside the Ferrari garage after the Grand Prix was unlike anything seen in recent memory. There was no champagne being popped, no laughter echoing through the paddock, no celebratory shouts from the crew. Instead, a suffocating, icy tension gripped every corner of the team's setup. Engineers whispered in tight circles, mechanics avoided eye contact, and the team's communication staff scrambled behind the scenes trying to contain a rapidly unfolding PR nightmare. The source of it all wasn't mechanical failure or poor strategy alone, it was Lewis Hamilton. And this time, he wasn't just frustrated. He was furious. Multiple insiders present at the track confirmed that Hamilton, visibly seething, walked straight past the Ferrari pit wall after stepping out of the car. He removed his helmet in silence, ignoring the usual post-race huddles, and went directly to his motorhome without exchanging a single word with his race engineer or any senior staff. When the call came for the team debrief, he didn't respond. When approached by Frédéric Vasseur, the team principal, Hamilton reportedly stood up, looked him in the eye, then turned away without a handshake or a word. The gesture was subtle, but the message was deafening. Something had broken beyond repair. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable moments in recent Ferrari history. While Charles Leclerc stood on the podium with a half-smile, clutching a trophy he had fought hard for, there was no congratulatory message from Hamilton, no Instagram post, no team photo. Instead, Hamilton sat alone in the dimly lit confines of his motorhome, headphones on, eyes fixed on the floor. Team photographers waited. Reporters lingered outside. Nothing. For nearly an hour, the seven-time world champion declined all interview requests, ignoring calls from team media managers and even the FIA's press coordinator. The silence wasn't apathy, it was a warning shot. Eventually, It was only the personal intervention of a trusted journalist from Sky Sports that brought him to speak. And when the camera rolled, there was no warmth in his tone, no smile of sportsmanship. Just calm fury. "I've driven through pain, I've driven through failure, I've driven through cars that weren't fast enough," he began, his voice sharp as a scalpel. "But I've never driven through betrayal." Every word was precise, calculated, and unmistakably loaded with intent. "This team told me we were in this together." That's clearly not true anymore. The impact of his words was instantaneous. Within minutes, social media exploded. Ferrari's official Instagram and X accounts were flooded with tens of thousands of comments, many of them brutal. Accusations flew like wildfire: favoritism, sabotage, betrayal. The hashtag sabotage in Spa went viral in less than 10 minutes, trending in over 20 countries by the end of the hour. Another, hashtag justice for Lewis, surged across platforms, with fans demanding transparency, demanding accountability, and in some cases, calling for resignations at the highest level within the team. Some fans posted side-by-side data comparisons from the weekend, pointing out inconsistencies between Hamilton's pit strategy and Leclerc's. Amateur analysts began uploading sector time breakdowns, highlighting supposed discrepancies in tire compound performance and fuel load strategies. Even some of Hamilton's most measured supporters began questioning whether this was just another case of strategic mismanagement or something darker, a coordinated effort to undermine him in favor of Leclerc. Former drivers began to weigh in as well. Several ex-Ferrari legends refrained from commenting publicly, but their silence only fueled speculation. One former world champion, speaking anonymously to the press, said, "If what Lewis is suggesting is even partially true, it's a disgrace. You don't bring in a legend, promise him equality, then leave him out in the cold when it suits the internal politics." Another former race winner went on record during a broadcast and suggested Ferrari doesn't know how to manage two alpha drivers, calling the situation embarrassing, toxic, and amateur. Inside the paddock, other teams were paying attention. Very close attention. Team principals exchanged glances in hospitality lounges. Senior strategists from McLaren and Aston Martin reportedly instructed their analysts to pull Ferrari's race strategy data for independent review. Red Bull engineers, ever the opportunists, were allegedly briefed to monitor the fallout in case Hamilton's relationship with Ferrari completely collapsed. What was initially considered just another post-race fallout was now morphing into a scandal that could change the dynamics of the entire grid. Internally, Ferrari scrambled. Meetings ran into the early hours of the morning. Vasseur, normally collected and politically astute, was said to be under immense pressure from both above and below. Some members of Ferrari's board were already demanding explanations, especially after key sponsors reportedly reached out to express concern about the brand's image. Ferrari's senior PR team prepared multiple draft statements but struggled to agree on tone. Acknowledge the rift and risk confirming Hamilton's accusations? Stay silent and risk losing control of the narrative? Either choice carried enormous consequences. Hamilton's camp, meanwhile, maintained an eerie silence. No tweets. No comments. No official statements. But those close to the driver, speaking anonymously, painted a picture of a man on the edge, not of quitting, but of shifting gears entirely. According to one longtime friend, this isn't a tantrum. This is a line in the sand. Lewis feels betrayed. He's done being patient. He's done playing the corporate game. He knows what he brings to the table, and he's not afraid to walk away if he's not respected. The moment marked a dramatic turning point. It wasn't just another bad weekend. It was an explosion of years of quiet frustration. A fracture between a driver and a team that may never be fully repaired. The race was over, but the real storm had just begun. In the days to follow, journalists would dig deeper, fans would speculate wildly, and rival teams would circle like sharks sensing blood in the water. Ferrari now finds itself at a dangerous crossroads. Public trust is dwindling. Internal divisions are deepening. And in Lewis Hamilton, they may have created not just a dissatisfied driver, but a defiant force now determined to reclaim control of his destiny, whether in red or elsewhere. And if that means taking the story public, setting the record straight, and exposing the inner workings of a team once seen as invincible, then so be it. Because once Hamilton speaks, the world listens. And this time, he's not holding anything back. Back in Maranello, beneath the glossy surface of press statements and orchestrated smiles, the internal atmosphere is reportedly boiling. What began as a controversial technical decision has unraveled into something far more sinister, something that now threatens to detonate the already fragile relationship between Ferrari and its most high-profile driver in decades. Within the walls of the Scuderia, legal teams have been mobilized, personal relationships are fraying, and senior management is scrambling to contain a crisis that has spiraled far beyond a mere on-track strategy call. This is not about split-second decisions anymore. This is about betrayal, about trust being shattered, about a legendary name feeling cornered by the very institution he once believed would be the final chapter of his historic career. According to multiple insiders, Lewis Hamilton's contract with Ferrari contains performance parity clauses, guarantees meant to ensure that both cars receive equal treatment in terms of upgrades, strategy, and technical support. These aren't informal agreements or gentlemen's handshakes. These are meticulously worded sections of a multi-million-dollar contract, signed under the assumption that Hamilton would be given the same tools, attention, and machinery as his teammate. But after Spa, those assumptions have been obliterated. Ferrari's decision to roll out a crucial aerodynamic upgrade package to only one side of the garage, reportedly without prior consultation or even a detailed explanation to Hamilton, has sparked a full-blown internal inquiry led by his legal advisors. It's believed that Hamilton's camp has already obtained internal telemetry comparisons, pit wall communications, and engineering logs from the entire weekend. Word from within the paddock suggests that discrepancies have been found, not just in the hardware, but in how data was relayed during key sessions, how feedback loops were handled, and how strategy decisions were ultimately made. While Ferrari maintains that the upgrade limitation was due to last-minute reliability concerns, the justification has done little to convince Hamilton or those in his inner circle. In fact, it's only amplified suspicions that this was not a logistical failure but a political maneuver, a deliberate choice that reflects a deeper strategic direction, possibly one that no longer has Lewis Hamilton at the center. The vague official statement released by Ferrari late Sunday evening was immediately met with skepticism. Describing the decision as a matter of ensuring reliability and operational integrity under evolving track conditions, it read more like a template response than an honest account. There were no technical specifics, no breakdown of what went wrong in terms of parts availability or testing cycles. Just platitudes. And in the high-stakes world of Formula One, where careers hang on every tenth of a second and trust is as valuable as horsepower, platitudes only serve to inflame. Red Bull, meanwhile, is watching closely. Not just watching. According to whispers from those with knowledge of ongoing conversations, they are actively engaging in discreet talks with Hamilton's representatives. These are not speculative feelers or friendly chats. They are private meetings, complete with non-disclosure agreements and carefully vetted intermediaries. The reigning champions are reportedly intrigued by the possibility of pairing Max Verstappen with Hamilton for a blockbuster season that could break viewership records and reframe Formula One's biggest rivalry. While such a partnership would be combustible, even dangerous, there's a growing belief that Red Bull is willing to entertain the chaos in exchange for dominance on the global stage. And for Hamilton, the appeal of walking into the heart of enemy territory, of dismantling Ferrari's silence by joining their fiercest rival, may now seem less like a betrayal and more like poetic vengeance. Back at Spa, the post-race scene was unlike anything seen from Hamilton in years. Gone was the media-trained composure, the polite deflections, the diplomatic phrasing. In its place was raw emotion, a man pushed to his limit by a series of decisions he could no longer rationalize or forgive. "There's a limit to how much a man can take," he said, his voice low and filled with fatigue, frustration, and fury. "And I think I've just found mine." The words weren't just a reflection of a bad weekend. They felt like a closing chapter, a man signaling that the last thread holding him to this team may have finally snapped. Behind the scenes, even some of Hamilton's closest allies within the Ferrari camp, engineers, data analysts, fitness staff, are reportedly considering their futures. Some have asked for meetings with HR. Others have begun discreet talks with rival teams. There's a quiet exodus forming, one that mirrors the internal fracture now running straight through the core of the Scuderia. Morale is plummeting. Communication lines are tense. The once dream pairing of Hamilton in red has begun to feel more like a slow-motion divorce than a romantic legacy finale. But this isn't the end. In many ways, this is the ignition point. Because if Spa was the match, what's coming next promises to be the wildfire. If Hamilton decides to go scorched earth, if he takes off the gloves, throws away the PR filter, and speaks openly about what's been happening behind closed doors, it could trigger the most explosive team fallout in decades. He knows the system. He's seen the emails, heard the conversations, lived inside the pressure cooker of political maneuvering and technical favoritism. If he talks, it won't just embarrass Ferrari. It could expose how Formula One's most storied team has lost its moral compass in the pursuit of internal power games. The next races will be drenched in tension. Every radio call will be scrutinized, every strategy decision viewed through a lens of suspicion. Hamilton's interactions with his team will be magnified. Will he refuse instructions? Will he walk away from the garage mid-session? Will he begin speaking to the press without pre-clearance from Ferrari's communications team? Every possibility is now on the table. And if a move to Red Bull, or even a shocking retirement, is truly in the works, then the stakes are now existential. This is no longer about points. It's about pride, legacy, and final acts. And in that final act, Lewis Hamilton is not interested in being polite. He's not interested in waiting for internal reviews or soft apologies delivered through intermediaries. He's not interested in pretending everything is fine. He wants justice. He wants answers. And above all, he wants a chance to remind the world that when you push him too far, when you back him into a corner, he doesn't retreat, he retaliates. If Ferrari thought they could manage him, mold him, or marginalize him, they've miscalculated. Because Hamilton isn't just a driver. He's a movement. And when movements feel betrayed, they don't go quietly. They erupt. What comes next may not be predictable, but it will be unforgettable.